Aloha, it's Joe Pardavila, and thanks for joining me for another episode of the Forbes Books podcast. And when it comes to building a successful business, I think Walt Disney said it best when he said, all our dreams can come true if we have the courage to pursue them. In the early 2000s, Fred Mwangaguhunga was a corporate attorney with entrepreneurial aspirations. His idea was to create an entertainment and celebrity news site focused on African American topics and celebrities. And since its founding in 2006, MediaTakeOut has grown to an audience of over 35 million monthly visitors. I'm really excited to talk to him today. Fred, how are you?
I'm great, thanks.
You're welcome. And Fred, you took a very circuitous route to becoming an entrepreneur. Like I mentioned in the open, you were a corporate attorney. So when did that transition or light bulb moment happen where you're like, I want to be an entrepreneur and I want to start my own business?
I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. It was kind of like the attorney thing kind of came by accident. I did pretty well in college and did really well in law school. And so it was kind of foolish not to go out and go onto Wall Street and see how much money you can make. Yeah. But if you would have asked me at 16 what I wanted to be, I would have said an entrepreneur, probably 18, 19, 20. At some point during like college and law school for a short period of time, I came up with this crazy idea of being a lawyer. And that's kind of what I ended up doing when I graduated. But as soon as I got there and I started practicing law, the entrepreneurship bug kind of kicked in, and I knew it was only a matter of time before I'd kind of end my legal career and begin this journey of entrepreneurship.
How important was your education when you made this jump? Because you get an MBA, you go to law school. Did that sort of prepare you for the launch of MediaTakeOut?
I had a lot of time to think about that, right? Because when it's a really big investment. Obviously, it costs a ton of money to go to law school and a ton of money to go to business school. It's 4 years out of your life, and then you go on to practice law, right? So I wonder if I would have taken that, the amount of money that I spent in graduate school and the amount of time that I spent doing that and going into practicing law for a little while. If I just took that time, the 7 years and the whatever $200,000, and I flew out to San Francisco and spent 7 years and $200,000 trying to start a company, would I have been better off? It's like one of those unanswered questions. Maybe it's a grass is always greener on the other side kind of question, but I don't really know the answer to it. But I don't think it's as clear as, you go to, business school and law school and get this foundation and whatever else. Because I know plenty of people that did the other way and they turned out fine.
And have you ever done that sliding doors thing where you're like, man, I probably could have saved a few bucks along the way if I just did it that way.
Yeah. It's certainly early on in my entrepreneurship, when times are really lean and I was looking at those student loan checks, I was like, what the heck did I do? I could have, not had this over my head.
I remember reading something where MediaTakeOut wasn't your first entrepreneurial venture. Weren't you like in dry cleaning or laundry or something like that?
Yeah, that was the first idea. I was, like I said, I always knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. So when I was practicing law, I was just constantly looking for business opportunities. And so the first business opportunity that we came up with was laundry and dry cleaning. We knew that laundry and dry cleaning was basically a commoditized business. People didn't care where you sent it to. Yeah. They all basically did the same reasonably good job. There was no real branding, no real differentiation. We wanted to come up with an idea that would be able to build a strong brand and to differentiate ourselves in the laundry space. And so we spent a year kind of figuring out how to do it, operationally working through, figuring out, how to wash and dry clean and fold clothes. And eventually we launched a business and we did that for 2 years. And it was an incredible learning experience.
Were there some elements of that venture that prepared you for the next step? Because you always like to, it's one of the things like you want to learn from your experiences. So what did you learn during that 2-year run that prepared you to move on?
I think the biggest thing, I learned a ton. And, for a lot of people out there, especially if you're thinking about entrepreneurship, I would say go out there and do it. You're going to make a ton of mistakes, but you're also going to learn a ton. Now, particularly in the laundry business, when I think about kind of what are the big things or the big lessons that I learned that I hold to this day, one was just the idea of keeping your cost structure in order. That was probably our biggest problem. We grew relatively quickly from a revenue standpoint, but our costs were always outpacing our revenue. And so we were always just felt like even though we were growing, we were constantly on this hamster wheel. And that was something that I knew, it was something that we struggled with. And, as I was in the business, I said to myself, whatever business I come into next, I'm never going to make this mistake again. And I can tell you that there isn't a day or a week that goes by that I'm not actively looking to keep our cost structure in check. And probably the second big thing that I got from the business is just the effect of how effective branding can be. I think especially now and today, until 2021, you no longer really see branding, and people don't really think about branding as much. They think more so about, hey, just go and get as much social media ads as you can. Yeah. And the idea is that, everything is commoditized, right? Like there's no difference between Uber and Lyft, other than a logo. It's just a matter of kind of who got the best prices. And so we're kind of living in a world right now where branding is kind of taking a backseat to analytics and metrics. And I think, for all the burgeoning entrepreneurs that are listening to this, that's a tremendous opportunity. When you have an entire industry or entire industries that aren't focusing on branding, think about what you can do if you were to focus on it.
And on your first learning lesson, I'm assuming when you started MediaTakeOut, you were pretty lean and mean, right? What was the initial startup with that? Was it you and one other person? Like, I'm sure that was the leanest it could probably have been at any point in your life.
Oh, it was extremely lean. I mean, I think we had like a free Yahoo internet account, and it was me. So it was like the costs were zero, minus my student loans and rent and stuff like that.
And so MediaTakeOut sort of evolved because you started out basically almost like a drudge, where you would post links from media sources, and then it evolved into you guys breaking stories and sort of creating content from scratch. So how far along did that happen in the sort of the aging process of MediaTakeOut?
So I'd say probably for the first couple of months, it was just external links. So it was basically like Drudge, where you'd go to the site, you'd find a headline that you thought was interesting, you'd click, and then you'd go to an external site to kind of see. And, pretty quickly we realized, hey, why don't we try and just hold on to our user base instead of consistently sending them out to other people? And so the idea was that, hey, could we figure out a way to do it? And, the only way you were going to do that is you were going to have to build up a newsroom. So we did that very slowly. First, it started off with just me doing original reporting. Then we brought in a couple of other people. And then eventually, before you know it, we had a full-blown news team producing original news content daily.
And when you converted it to sort of this full-blown news agency, what was the sort of the entrepreneurial question? The find a problem, fix a problem. What problem were you fixing there?
So I think there were two problems. One is that fairly early on, we made the pivot to focusing primarily on not just celebrity news, but African-American celebrity news. And at the time, I think now it's not very controversial, and the idea that there'd be a place to focus on African-American celebrity news is not at all a novel idea. But I can tell you in 2006 when we started, it was an extraordinarily novel idea. No one really thought it could work. No one thought that there was a true market for this, partially because I'm African-American. My wife, who is my partner in the company, she's African-American too. She recognized that, no, there really is a market for this. And I think a lot of the people at some of the bigger publications, maybe they just didn't have the representation on the senior levels. And so they just couldn't see it. And so there was a tremendous advantage that we were able to see this demand in the market that just was being unfulfilled. And so I think that was problem one. And then problem two is, I think, the idea of not just putting out what everyone wants you to see, but taking a step a little bit deeper into it and trying to produce a kind of true and more accurate depiction of what's going on out there. And then we also tried to be fun and funny and lighthearted about a lot of the stuff. I think that you wrap that all up in a bow, and that's what we were looking to do. And I think we're pretty successful at it.
And for folks who don't remember 2006, which is crazy to think that's like 15 years ago, which is like really mind-boggling. But 2006 was early stages of social media. So folks who wanted to get their news, get their fix, when it came to gossip, at that time, 2006, you're talking about the Perez Hiltons of the world, you're talking about the Just Jareds. So when that sort of shift happened with social media where everyone's just started all of a sudden, I'm not just going to go to this website, I'm going to either follow them on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, how did that change what you were doing at MediaTakeOut? Because it had to be a little more than just, let's post this on our page and then all of a sudden people will come to it. There added a layer of difficulty to it, right? The advance of social media?
Yeah, I mean, I think it changed things a lot. I think probably the biggest change in social media was because people were able to live just reporting what was kind of obviously being reported out there. And you were able to create an entire business surrounded on basically collecting press releases from different people and putting out the same news. And there could be 500 places putting out the same news, and people would essentially choose which one of the 500 places they liked better. Maybe they had a certain kind of writing style or a certain kind of snark that made you get your news from there. When social media changed it all is that all the kind of obvious news was automatically pushed to your newsfeed immediately.
Right.
And so the places that kind of chose that second form of journalism struggled almost immediately. And so a lot of the times they tried to move on to social media, but they weren't as effective at kind of producing the content as, Facebook or Instagram's algorithm. And so I think they've struggled a lot. You're facing the challenges from social media, but social media can't push out the content before you did because, social media is basically circulating created content, and you're in fact a content creator, right? So it's almost like you can have Netflix, and Netflix can have a great algorithm, but if there's nobody producing movies, right, then there's no Netflix, right? So I think that we were able to hold on to our audience and, in fact, actually increase our audience because I think a lot of times people would hear about things, right? Like, so maybe you find out Beyonce was spotted in a restaurant in California. So maybe you might have seen that on social media, but maybe you want to know, oh, hey, okay, I don't want to just know that she was out at a restaurant. Like, what did she eat? What was she wearing? Right? And then that's when you can't necessarily get that from social media. And then maybe you'll go to Google or you'll go to MediaTakeOut and you'll say, okay, let me see. Oh, there she is. She's wearing this, and this is who she came with, and giving you a lot more meat to the substance of a story that wasn't necessarily there. So I think the challenges are real, but I think if you're actually producing unique content, the challenges aren't as difficult. When you're not producing unique content, I think the challenges are insurmountable.
But also, if you rely on the Facebooks of the world, and for example, I remember, I'm sure you know this as well as anybody, every once in a while, Facebook will change their algorithm in terms of who's getting what news and everything like that. And I remember, working and living in New York, that every once in a while, Facebook would do this, and then a company would feel repercussions. They'd have to start laying people off because their lifeblood was, and I'm not going to name the company, but they're like these digital companies that create online content. They were living off Facebook, and then all of a sudden, Facebook changed the algorithm. And they're like, oh God, we're going to go broke. So how?
That is a very, very real thing. I know a good friend of mine started a company. It was incredibly successful, raised a ton of money, had a full staff, and was relying largely on content from Facebook. And they changed their algorithm in January, and by March he was out of business. And this is a person that had a very, very successful company, raised tens of millions of dollars, and was out of business within 2 months from Facebook. So I think those are the kind of warning signs that I saw. It was glaring to me, and actually it was surprising to me, at least initially, when social media started coming on board, how many media companies just immediately rushed to them and dumped all of their content onto these places, because you could almost see this reckoning coming that obviously at some point they're going to change their algorithm. They're going to try and they're not necessarily interested in producing news content. They're just trying to hold the users for as long as they can, and if that's with news content, that's fine. If it's with cat videos, that's fine. But as users, as their tastes change, they'll just change, what they're sharing to their users.
And, I'm curious in terms of stylistically how you've changed since 2006. And the reason I bring this up is the Britney Spears case that's going on publicly with her conservatorship. And a lot of people now are more sensitive to the fact that for many years, Britney Spears has been battling mental illness. But in the 90s, as you probably remember, Fred, I think you might be a Gen Xer like myself, it was open forum to rip Britney to shred, whether it was a late night comedian or whether it was a Perez Hilton of the world. And now all of a sudden we're saying like, hey, wait a minute, these are real people with real problems. So I'm just curious, has your sort of style changed into, hey, maybe before we comment or make fun of this one person, maybe there's something more than just they screwed up. There's an added element to it. Has that changed at all for you?
Yeah, I think it has. I mean, in the beginning, it was kind of, hey, let's find a celebrity and make fun of them.
Yeah.
Just for the sake of making fun of them. And I think at some point, one, you start to feel it internally. You're like, what are we doing? But equally, from a business standpoint, you turn off a lot of users, customers, when you do that, right? Like there's a certain kind of level that if you go below it, below this level of decency, you're going to turn off your readers. And the last thing that you want to do, you work so hard to get the readers, you work so hard to get them to continue to come back. The last thing that you want to do is turn them off. So I think, as society's norms and society's tolerance for bullying, the idea of, even talking about bullying is something that people talk about all the time. 6 years ago, it was almost unheard of to talk about bullying.
Especially when it came to celebrities, it was the thing was like, oh, they're public facing, so you could say whatever they want about them.
Right. I mean, look what's happening to Chrissy Teigen right now, right?
Yeah.
And especially a lot of what the backlash against her is not her bullying regular people on Twitter, it's bullying other celebrities, right? So it's a celebrity bullying other celebrities. So like I said, the people's tastes change. And whereas, a joke or something that you said in 2006 might have been laughed at and fun and, shared as a meme, in 2021, it's seen as evil, mean bullying. So you have to constantly, initially, one is just within personally yourself, you want to just become a better human being.
Yeah.
But, from a business standpoint, you also want to make sure that the morals and ethics of your business are in tune with the ethics and morals of your customers. So, because of both of those, I think there's been significant changes in the way that reporting has been done. And
now as a CEO of the company, I'm basically, the buck stops with you. And I'm sure you're not the one guy sitting at a computer anymore looking for stories to report. Does stuff ever get run up the flagpole and be like, hey, Fred, we got this one story about the baby. I don't know. I don't know. It's pretty salacious. Do you think we should run this? What do you think? Do you still get involved in that sort of content discussion?
Yeah, every day. I mean, there's always like stories that you wonder, like, should we go with this? Should we not? Most of the time the question kind of comes down to exactly what we were just talking about, which is it decent to put out this story? Or what level of harm will putting out this story do compared to kind of what the public's interest is in this story? At the end of the day, when people are, if you just boil it down, when people are coming to MediaTakeOut or any entertainment site, they're looking, they want to see beautiful people. They might want to, go, ooh, oh my God, I can't believe that they did that. Or, ooh, look at this scandal. But the people that they're reading about, they actually care about, they actually like. A lot of times they love these people. They're not looking for them to be destroyed and torn down and beaten up or anything like that. So you have to recognize that. And so if you have a story that's just completely designed to absolutely destroy someone, what's the purpose of doing that, right? Like, you're not going to, at the end of the day, even if you do get a ton of hits on that story, it's going to leave a bad taste in the mouth of the people, and they're not going to like it. And then, like I said, that's kind of from a business standpoint. And from a personal standpoint, just a personal karma standpoint, why would you want to do that? What is the true benefit of it? Right? Like, you're not, whatever bump you're going to get is going to be a couple of hour bump or a 1 day bump. You're probably not going to be any meaningfully different from a monetary standpoint. What's the purpose of doing this? And I think, when you've been around this game for 16 years, you realize there's not a story in the world that's going to make you, and not a story in the world that's going to break you. So if you got to pass on a couple of them, so be it.
So have you had that situation where you've had stories come your way, and then all of a sudden you're like, no, we can't do that. And then all of a sudden it blows up somewhere else? It sounds like the way you're speaking, it happens a lot. Yeah.
So even it actually happened like yesterday.
Okay. Honestly, the way you were talking about it, it was like a very fresh wound. So I was like, I have a feeling this happens quite recently.
It happens all the time. But yesterday was one of those things. But this was just kind of like a weird, so someone sent us this video and they were like, oh, this is Hunter Biden, doing a whole bunch of stuff. And I was like, look, I don't want any smoke from Biden. I don't want any smoke from the Biden administration. I don't want anything like that. Plus there were all kinds of legal implications, like, how did you get this? Was this kind of stolen? Whatever else? Is this or are we being used as some Russian bot or whatever? So you have all of those kind of considerations out there. It would have likely been a good story, but we just had to pass on it and say it's just not worth it to kind of put this out there. We don't know where this is coming from. We don't know what the true agenda is behind this. So we're going to pass on it. So that was just an example. I think probably a very atypical example, but those type of things happen all the time.
Oh, by the way, Fred, has MediaTakeOut sort of gone under some rebranding? Because I noticed that for a while it was MediaTakeOut, but now you're using the branding MTO News. Can you fill me in on that?
Yeah, I think we've been kind of making the kind of slow shift for the last couple of years. And part of it has just been the change in users' tastes. And part of it, in large part, was kind of a response to social media. Before we used to put up a bunch of pictures and not many words, and the idea was just you can kind of flip through and see a whole bunch of pictures on Media Takeout. Obviously now with social media, Instagram and TikTok and the like, there are plenty of places if you just want to go and flip through pictures and see. You can't really compete in terms of images. What you can't compete in is in terms of context. So people will go on Instagram and see a picture and say, wow, and they see, they might see it 5 or 6 different times, and they might see, a couple of things about it. And then they're gonna leave social media to say, okay, I want to know what exactly was going on in that picture. What is that picture? And that's when they come to Media Takeout. So that meant that we had to shift from kind of being more heavily on images and video, and now more heavily on kind of providing context for the images and videos that you can find elsewhere on social media. And so that shift of kind of moving away from kind of like just the fun, playful place that has a bunch of pictures to this place that's actually producing larger and longer form news content. That's the shift from Media Takeout to MTO News, which we've been kind of in the process of.
Got it. No, I didn't want you to think I didn't notice that. I was on that, Fred. I got that. One of the things I'm curious about, because as an entrepreneur and also being in sort of like the tech space, I think it's almost like nowadays it's like, I want to start a company so then it could be acquired by a Facebook or fill in the blank of a large conglomerate. Is that something that you see down the road where you can see Media Takeout as part of, being swallowed up and being part of a larger media empire? Or do you like the fact that you have this sort of like independence of doing things your way when you want it?
I don't know that I have a preference. If it was a good fit with a good company and it made sense, yeah, I'd go with that. Or if I can stay on my own and kind of, run it the way that I want, I'd stay with that too. I think one of the big mistakes, and I did mention this earlier, before I started the laundry service, while in business school, I worked for a telecom startup. And the idea behind the telecom startup, I wasn't really clear about. I didn't really know too much about it. I just knew that it was raising a ton of money and people thought it was a hot stock or a hot company to invest in. And hey, just kind of go there, work there for 2 or 3 years, and then it's going to turn into a multi-billion-dollar company and you're going to be rich. And so when I went there and I thought everything was going to go well, and within 6 months, everything went basically to hell. And they shut things down and we basically lost everything. And at the time, it was a very painful time for me, and partially because you had to kind of, everyone, when you told all your friends you were going to this company, everyone was like, oh my God, Fred's going to be this, really successful like tech person. And then when it didn't work, you had to go back to the same people and basically tell them, that you failed at what you did. It was so humbling of an experience. The big lesson I got from that is don't worry about where things are going to go and how it's going to end up, whether you're going to go public or whatever else. Just try and run a real successful business, not some kind of scam, not some kind of finesse that you could put some stuff together, not some kind of, fly-by-night arbitrage opportunity, a real true business where you're producing a quality product or quality service and you're selling it to a customer and making them happy. And I think if you do that and you're following kind of sound business practices, you'll be fine. And then whatever happens, whatever opportunities come forward, you just take them as they are. And that was I learned that early on, luckily. I think unfortunately too many people don't learn that lesson. And a lot of times when I'm talking to young entrepreneurs, they do say things like, oh yeah, I just want to start this company and then Facebook will buy it. And I'm thinking, that would be nice, but what if Facebook doesn't buy it? Then what happens, right? Do you really want to be in this company for the next 5 years or 10 years? Do you have the capital to support this business? And I think a lot of times people just don't think about that because the wave of everything.
Yeah. And with your company, I'm just curious because if I feel like I get the vibe of like the good to great, the hedgehog thing that James Collins writes about in his books, about the fact that like find what you do and do it best. Don't do something that you're not really meant to do or able to do. Did you ever worry while you were growing Media Takeout, we're like, hey, we should dabble in this. Oh, this is the hot thing. We should dabble in that. Or did you always have that hedgehog mentality of like, let's just do what we do here?
You have to kind of have both because you don't really grow. A lot of times, if you're going to grow, you're growing outside of your core customer base. So usually, if you've been doing it and you've been relatively successful, you have some customers and customers are repeat customers. They're coming back. That's great. And you know how to do them and you know how to properly service them. That's great. and you can grow those too. But where you see real growth or higher rate of growth is if you go to people that are outside of your traditional customer base. And so in order to do that, you have to kind of expand the way that you think. So in that sense, I think you should always be taking chances. And sometimes, you take chances on trying something new that might seem like it's crazy and it might turn into a great idea and it might not. So if you're going to spend your time, you probably want to spend 80% of your time sticking to your core competency, making sure you got that right, and constantly looking to kind of iterate to get better at that. And then the other 20% of your time, you should just be taking shots at growth, because those are growth opportunities. And over time, and like I said, I've been doing this for 16 years, so there's a little bit of, you start to see that all those kind of crazy ideas that you kind of came up with, with this other 20% of your time, a lot of those will eventually end up being your core business, maybe 5 or 10 years down the line. So it's really important to do that. And, a lot of times that's the frustrating part. That's the part that takes up a lot of kind of mental energy. But at the same time, it's also a part, especially if you've been doing something for a long time, that can give you the greatest amount of enthusiasm to get up and go to work in the morning. Both of those things are really important to do.
You talk about, serving your core audience, but when you do venture out, it could sometimes either contradict what the audience expects of you. So is that also a fine line? You have to be like, hey, listen, this will help us get some, grow our audience, but it may put off a small section of ours. Is that something that you've had to toy with as well when you expanded? Yeah.
Oh yeah. Remember the 20% over there, 90% of that 20% is going to fail, right? Like it's either going to fail because maybe it costs too much money. Maybe it's just a bad idea. Maybe your audience hates it. Maybe a portion of your audience is offended. There's a number of reasons why you'll eventually decide that didn't work. But the 10% of that 20% that actually sticks, you could really grow, and usually it's growing at a way higher rate of growth than the rest of your business. And then, like I said, over time, you'll find that large portions of your core business end up coming from there. So it's kind of like a funnel of kind of new ideas and new business. It's R&D. The concepts that I'm saying are not particularly novel.
Yeah.
They're business 101 concepts. But I think a lot of times you can read these things, you know them, but at the same time, I went to business school, right? Like I went to business school, I had entrepreneurship courses, I talked to people, I had all the mentors in the world, and I made every single basic mistake in business when I got out there. And so I think a lot of times people just need to constantly hear these things and hear these concepts kind of said differently to kind of get them in their head. Because and then make these mistakes also when you're out there and doing it, and don't beat yourself up over it. Like I said, most of the new ideas that you come up with are going to be bad ideas. Whatever, if you think that you have the perfect business idea right now, you'll iterate it, and by the time it becomes successful, it'll look nothing like what you're doing. But you have to kind of keep on it and just learn and grow.
And, when you pass away 60, 70, 80 years from now, you're going to be known as the founder of MediaTakeOut. But is there something else in that obituary that you'd like to have written in there about in terms of successes? I mean, is there something that you have like bucket list item where you're like, I want to be able to do this on your own? I'm not talking about whether within the MTO brand and empire, but is there something else that you really want to add to your legacy?
Yeah, I think one thing that I've always wanted to do, and the last couple of years I've had a lot, it's been really busy for me, so I haven't really been able to do it, is just talking to minority entrepreneurs. And the thing about it is I talk to entrepreneurs all the time. A lot of them are my colleagues, different companies, some minorities, some not. And I notice that when I talk to kind of a lot of white male entrepreneurs, they say one thing. And then when I talk to a lot of African-American entrepreneurs, they say stuff that I'm just like, I don't believe that you're saying that. Some of this stuff is just so wrong that it's striking. And so I love to just talk. Anytime I meet an African-American entrepreneur, I love to talk to them because I think it's important. And a lot of the thing is, I'm not trying to hold myself out to be something different. I thought the same things that a lot of these young African-American entrepreneurs thought too. It wasn't until I kind of grew up in my entrepreneurship journey that I started recognizing like kind of how to build a company using sound business principles. And I think a lot of times it's just not there in a lot of young African-American entrepreneurs. And I think you can see that when you start looking at kind of successes in companies, you start to see that discrepancy kind of lays there. And I want to just kind of, I don't know whether it's speaking, I don't know whether it's writing books, just to kind of breaking kind of commonly held myths in African-American entrepreneurship that are constantly perpetuated, that are false, and that are hurting African-American entrepreneurship. And so that's, if there's one other thing that I want to do outside of Media Takeout, it's that.
And it's interesting, Fred, because in your situation, I think you existing alone helps African-American entrepreneurs, because you growing up, outside of the Oprah Winfreys of the world, you never heard about Black entrepreneurs making it big. There was like one or two random, you would see, one or two CEOs in the Fortune 500. So the fact that you exist and thriving, that gives hope to everybody. So I know you want to help people in terms of practical terms and giving them advice, but you just doing what you're doing goes a long way for multiple generations.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true too. I try and talk to people out there. I do know that when we started this, the idea of African-American owned entertainment companies was kind of a novel concept. Now I think if you look at how many African-American entertainment companies have come out after we did, after seeing kind of the groundwork that we laid and showing people how it can be done, that's one thing that I'm proud of too.
Yeah, and lastly on this point, the spending power of African-Americans is just, it's crazy huge. It's like in the trillions. And I feel like people are starting to sort of pick up on it. But what have you seen in terms of like your lifespan here at Media Takeout in terms of now making it easier to grow revenues on the dollars on the ad side because of the fact that people are recognizing the buying power of African Americans?
Yeah, I think that's very real. I mean, I know that when we started, the idea of, and when you were talking about African American ad spends, you were talking about discounted ad spends, right? So people were saying, "Hey, these are not people that aren't spending a lot of money, so we're gonna give you less money for an African American audience." Now I think things are changing, and now it's either closer to even, or if it's a specifically targeted ad, we're getting specifically a little bit higher because it's a lot more targeted ad revenue. So I think things are changing. The world is just becoming a better place, and it's happening so quickly. It's when you look at the amount of changes that have happened for African Americans in the last 5-10 years, and it took 20 years to get that level of growth. 20 in the 80s, and then maybe it took 50 years or 60 years to get that level of growth. And things are just kind of moving so quickly. It's really an exciting time, and obviously I have kids, so I want the world to kind of continually change. And, the world that they have is just such a better world than the world that I grew up in. And a lot of the things that kind of me and the people before me and the people in my generation have been fighting for, they're going to be able to kind of reap the fruits of those. And that's another thing to be really happy about.
Awesome. That's funny because I've been reading a lot about World War II lately. And I mean, we talk about the progress, and you said how much things have changed in the last 10 or 15 years. I mean, if you look at the how slow the progress was from post-World War II to the 80s, it was, to call it a snail's pace would be offensive to snails. But I think we can look at the silver lining, the bright side of things, you fill in whatever cliche you want to say there. I mean, it is heartening. And I'm sure, as you mentioned, to see the growth and the progression that has happened in the last few years. I mean, if anything, we can hang our hat on that as a human race, we are advancing in a better direction.
Yeah, I think it's amazing, and especially when you're looking at kind of computing and the shift from computing to mobile computing, and who knows where we're going next, whether it's AR, VR. It's just like things are just happening so quickly. It's almost like, remember it was like our parents that couldn't work a VCR, and now it's like, I'm not sure. I get on TikTok. My daughter's on there, and she's doing stuff. I'm like, how'd you do that, right? Like, here I am, the tech guy, and I'm running into problems with the apps. So things are just moving so quickly. But it's great. It's exciting. It's exciting to go to work, especially when you're doing celebrity news. This is the best job by far that I've ever had. I know earlier on you said, what I think about selling or going to another company or anything like that. At one point it kind of came to me. I was like, if I were to sell, what would I do? I would then leave this job, which I love, and then I'd have to just go out there. I'm too young to really retire. I'd have to go out there and start another company from scratch, and that doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun. Why don't I just stay where I am right now and just enjoy it?
I mean, you sure want to go back to door-to-door laundry? You want to try that?
No.
Well, Fred, this has been a great chat. I appreciate you taking the time and filling my head with some knowledge bombs. I really appreciate it. I wish you the best of luck with Media Takeout, and can't wait to see what you do next.
All right, thanks a lot.
His name is Fred Mwangaguhunga, and he is the CEO and founder of Media Takeout. And that's it for this episode of the Forbes Books Podcast. If you enjoy the show, make sure you take a second to subscribe so you automatically get my new shows when they drop. Also, if you have a minute, I would love if you left me a review so more amazing entrepreneurs like yourself can discover the show. And please, don't forget the golden rule and treat others as you want to be treated. Thanks for listening. Until next time, adios.
This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio. Find out more at ForbesBooksRadio.com.